Howard.
Gene, and,
Yes, I go by the name of Gene, yes.
okay. And just out of, what year, in what year were you born?
May 26, 1928.
1928, my goodness, so you've been around a while.
90-some years, or 90 years right now.
And you started your career in aviation, how? Tell me how you got into aviation.
Well, during World War II, I was building model airplanes. I started building model airplanes about 10 years of age, and I always liked flying the airplanes. So I presumed that when I thought the war would go on a lot longer than it did, and I thought that I would become a captain in the Army Air Corps. And
So you went into the Army Air Corps?
no, sir. That was where I was expecting to go, but the war ended before I graduated from high school. So when graduation came, June of 1946, the war had ended, and both the Navy and the Army had closed their flight training programs. And so I didn't know what I was going to do. I had taken a college prep course, so I figured I'd go to college, but I didn't know how I was going to afford going to college because I hadn't saved any money. This was during the Depression. And so upon graduation, the last day that I was going to be in the high school, someone came by the room I was in and said, "There's an admiral in the auditorium who wants to see all graduating boys down there right now."
And what year was this, 1946?
1946.
So they were still looking for, even though people were being discharged from the military then, they were still looking for recruits.
Yes, and the admiral made a big point out of, they were the Navy was reopening their flying program, and that they wanted the cream of the crop to become pilots for the Navy.
And you immediately raised your hand and said, "I'm cream of the crop"? Or?
No, I didn't think I was cream of the crop, and so I didn't think that I was going to go into the Navy flight training program. I didn't plan on it. Then about somebody came by my house and told me two of my friends had made it into the Navy flight training program, and they were going to go to this college and that one go to that college, and I thought, you know, these guys were just like me. I felt like I was prepared, but I thought we were all pretty much the same type of people, and so I thought maybe I'd give the Navy program a try. So I guess I had an application form that the Admiral had given me, but I didn't remember bringing it home. But since I thought I'd go ahead and fill it out, and I did. And I took it down and presented it to my father, who was reading a book in the living room at the time. And when I pushed it in front of him, he wanted to know what that was, and I said, "It's my application for the Navy flight training program." And he said, "Oh no," he said, "I want you in the military, and I don't want you flying airplanes." And I said, "But Dad, it's the only way I can go to college this fall." And he signed it immediately. So a couple of weeks later, the Navy sent me some bus ticket and some vouchers and so forth, and told me to go to Detroit and report in at such and such a place. And so I did, and there were quite a few people there. I don't remember ever getting a count of how many, but there were several. And one of the first things they did was give us a very preliminary type eye test. and a few of the guys flunked out immediately. And then the rest of us, they put in a classroom for two days straight, as I remember, and we took psychological and academic type courses, classes of various things, and at the end of the classwork, why they called us all together again up in front of the building, in front of the guy's office, the officer's office that was there, and he said, well, I guess they'd given us a few more eye tests, like a colorblind test and so on and so forth. I don't remember now everything, but some of the guys washed out on that, and then
Physically, you met all these
Yes.
criteria.
yes, I met all the physical requirements.
That's
and,
great.
And I wasn't sure of the academic part of, or the psychological part. I didn't have any idea. So the guy called all the remaining troops together up there, and he said, he called out a person's name, and he had a handful of manila folders, and he handed the guy his folder, and then he called out another name and handed him a manila folder and another name and so on, until there were only two of us left standing there. And then he said, so I figured I didn't make it, that all these other guys had, because I didn't get a manila folder. And so then he says, you two guys come into my office with me. And so he took us into his office, and he said, raise your right hand, and they swore us into the Navy. Two out of a whole bunch. And I made the comment about it. I said, well, you didn't do very well this time. I said, you only got two of us. And he says, that's better than usual.
Oh, that's great.
So they
Well,
were,
that's good news.
so they were really flunking them out, I'll tell you.
So I probably the lesson learned there is don't give up.
I guess. Well, I had no idea really what was going on. So then he asked us where we were going to go to college in the fall. Well, the other fellow that was there with me had already planned to go to the University of Michigan, whether he was
And what part of the country did you live in?
Michigan.
Michigan.
And he lived in the Detroit area, and I lived in Muskegon, Michigan, which is across the state, about halfway up the lower peninsula. So anyway, he asked him where he was going. He said University of Michigan. So he asked me where I was going, and I just graduated from high school, and I had made no application to a college. So I just told him I'd be going to the junior college there in Muskegon, which had to accept me because I'd graduated from high school
Okay.
under state law, so I knew I could go there. And so that's what I told him. So we were sworn in, and starting on they were going to send us to 2 years of college first. After we graduated from 2 years of college, they would take us down to Pensacola, Florida, and we'd go through 16 more weeks of college-type courses, except they would be Navy-oriented, and then we would go into the flying program from there.
So how long did it take you to actually get involved in a Navy program? Did you go to school for 2 more years, or?
I don't quite understand the question.
Well, you said it would take you another 2 years to prepare for the...
Okay, well, after graduating from high school, then I went into junior college, he went into the university. And a funny thing was, it's kind of a side note, his father was an engineer for Norge, Borg Warner Corporation, that build refrigerators and other things for households. and he worked there in Detroit area somewhere, and the family lived in the Detroit area. But he had been, his father had been sent to the Norge company that was in Muskegon, Michigan. So the family moved to Muskegon, where I was from, and the other fellow's name was Fred, and Fred had a younger brother named Alan, and Alan was in the same grade as my sister, who was 18 months younger than I was, and they were both in the same class then in Muskegon. Well, Fred and I were the two that got into the Navy flight training program, and Alan and my sister Beverly were the top two kids in their graduating class 2 years later.
That's interesting.
So, or a year
So-
and a half later. I guess.
So how long was it from the time that you graduated high school till you got into Navy flight training?
Oh gosh, that was, I don't remember exactly now when I went into the training, into flying, actual flying of aircraft. But it was another, well, it was 2 years of college, and then,
So you did continue on to college?
yes.
Okay.
Well, the 2 years prior to going into the training,
Right.
flight training program. And then we went to 16 weeks of flight school, or pre-flight
And
school.
that was down in Pensacola?
I was in Pensacola, Florida. And then we went on to the flight training program. And they had such a bulge of pilots, or potential pilots, in the pre-flight school, that when you graduated from pre-flight, they didn't have the airplanes and the instructors and so forth to handle all the kids that were going through.
So pre-flight says that you haven't started flying yet,
That's correct,
okay?
pre-flight. So they started giving us other things to do. They gave us VD movies, and they taught us how to play tennis, and they showed us movies, and I don't know what all, killing time for, keep us busy. And so then somebody hit on the idea, they started giving us, or they gave us a vocabulary test. And all those that passed the vocabulary test were the next ones to go into the flight training program. And those that flunked could stay back and study vocabulary. So my roommate was from Pennsylvania and had majored in English courses, and he didn't pass the program, but I did.
That's interesting.
So I got to go then into the next class of flight training.
So you moved ahead when the other ones were just waiting to pass tests and things like that, but sounds like you moved into flight training fairly.
Well, I think one of the reasons why I passed the vocabulary test and he didn't was that I used to enjoy the Reader's Digest, and they had a page in every issue on vocabulary, and I used to really enjoy reading that particular page and studying a little bit on that page of vocabulary words that they offered. And I'd been doing that for some time, so maybe that's why I had a better vocabulary, I don't know. But I presume that was why I was a little better prepared than he was.
So carrying that forward then, you went through pilot, you actually got to fly airplanes, and what type of airplane was the first one you trained in?
It was the SNJ, as the Navy
Oh,
called
my
it. It
goodness.
was what the Air Force called AT-6.
T6,
And,
and that's a tail dragger.
And yes, yeah, that's right. And it was prior to that they had the was a biplane they used for the primary trainer. And
That was-
then
so
you
this is-
then you graduated to the T6.
AT6, advanced trainer, okay?
Yeah,
So there's a PT, and that was a biplane of some kind?
yes, it was a
Steerman, perhaps?
Stearman, yes, sir.
Okay, yes.
I was thinking of Waco or Waco. But, yeah, the
They
Stearman.
started a tail dragger, okay? I was curious about that.
Well, so was the biplane, a tail
Yeah, but
dragger.
the T6 was a tail dragger as well,
That's correct,
with a lot bigger engine.
yes, yes. So most of the guys that were already in the Navy couldn't believe that they started us right out in the T6.
Yeah.
But there's no problem with that. I mean,
Well, so you remember to keep your right foot ready at all times. Because they're gonna take off and try to turn right if you add a lot of power quickly. And so, how was the T6? Do you enjoy flying the T6?
oh, I enjoyed it very much, yeah. I thought how lucky I was that I got.
You sat in the front seat and the instructor sat in the back seat?
Yes, sir.
Is that correct? And this is in Pensacola as well?
Yes, this is, well, it's just north of Pensacola, called Whiting Field. It was a little town, I think, called Milton, Florida, was the closest civilization to the base. So, yeah, so, since I was at Whiting Field, you couldn't go anywhere or do anything unless you had transportation, and so I couldn't afford a car, so I bought a motorcycle, and I had to borrow the money to do that. And,
Even though you were, and had you become a Navy officer at this time?
no, sir.
You had not?
It's when you graduate from the flight training program that you become an officer at the same time. So you get your wings and your commission at the same time upon completion of the advanced training.
And that
So
would then, you would select a career path then for the Navy, is that correct?
Well, they pretty much tell you what they want you to do. They did give you, for your advanced aircraft, they pretty much gave you what you wanted to do to fly. But they decided, well, you did get to choose whether you wanted to go East Coast or West Coast.
How about single engine versus multi-engine, anything like that?
When you made your selection of aircraft, you could go either single or multi, but you had to put down some of the opposite aircraft of what you wanted. So in other words,
They'd give you an aircraft type and say, select from the following column, right?
well,
2 from column A, 1 from column B, something like that?
yeah, you could put 3 or 4 down in the one you wanted, and then you could put, but you had to put 2 of the opposite also down.
Multi-engine transport,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I had selected a F8F Bearcat as number 1, and AD1 is the second choice.
F8F Bearcat, could you describe that aircraft?
Well, it's a single engine, small fighter type aircraft. And the AD1 is an attack type airplane.
Now, the difference being a fighter type aircraft, you'd be air-to-air combat, that sort of thing,
Yes, sir.
and AD would be
Attack.
attack.
Ground support.
Ground support, so that would carry bomb loads and things like that.
Yeah,
Guns for strafing,
that's correct.
okay, interesting. So you're.
And then there were multi-engine airplanes, and I had to make a choice or 2 on those. So,
That might be a C-47 or,
well, in the Navy, they were PBMs and
oh,
P2Vs and
P-2V Neptune,
yeah. And I don't recall,
Are those wheel-type airplanes?
they're land-based primarily.
Land-based, okay.
Well, the PBM is a seaplane.
So it's possible you could have a multi-engine seaplane rating or continue on. And which direction do you continue?
I wanted the single engine, single place type aircraft, the fighters or the attack. And jets were just coming into being at that time. And the Navy policy was that you could not get into jets training unless you were a fighter pilot. So if I'd gotten the F-8F, I could have gone right on into jets. But since I got the AD-1, which was my second choice, I did not qualify as a fighter pilot, so therefore did not qualify for jet training. So the way I got into AD-1s in the first place was that they had cut off the selection right before I was up for choice. And in other words, the class was filled. All of the airplanes had been assigned that they had. So I was the next one on the docket which would mean that when the next class convened, I would be number one and I would get my choice of F-8F. However, the class that just was filled, about a week after it was filled, an AD pilot was killed and they put me in his place. So that's how I got ADs, which was my second choice.
That's your ground support type of aircraft?
Yes.
Okay. And that's what you trained in?
So that's what I trained in.
Did you ever fly any combat missions in that type of aircraft?
No, sir. I never flew any combat at all. When I got my wings and commission, which was after carrier qualification in your advanced type aircraft, I was assigned to an anti-submarine squadron and given World War II type aircraft to fly, TBMs or TBFs.
So those are TBMs are large
torpedo bombers.
Torpedo bombers, large single-engine torpedo bombers.
Yes, that's correct.
Yep.
And they would carry a crew of, I believe, 5 people, or could carry that big a crew.
I didn't realize they were that big.
Yeah.
And you'd start off as a co-pilot on that type of thing?
No, there's no co-pilot.
There's no co-pilot.
There's one pilot, and that's you.
And that's you.
Yeah.
You've got 4 people to please, right?
Well.
4 people to grade your landings.
Yeah, right. So yeah, I was assigned immediately to. When I had selected the West Coast over the East Coast, and I had. When I went to the West Coast, they assigned me immediately to an anti-submarine squadron, flying the TBMs.
And where were you based?
In North Island at
San Francisco.
San Diego.
Oh, San Diego. Okay.
San Diego, California.
Of all the, if you were talking to a group of potential recruits, what would you tell them? What did you learn from this whole process?
I don't know. I don't think I ever learned much.
Keep trying. It sounds like don't give up because the odds are against you.
Well, I don't know. Life deals you a lot of things that are suddenly unexpected or different from what you had anticipated, and so on and so forth. And you just cope with it, whatever it is. And that affects your training, and it affects your livelihood, and it affects a lot of things. But I've been very well satisfied with my life. Well, by the time I completed my flight training program, the jet training had reopened, and so regardless of type of aircraft that you learned in, if you got your Navy wings, you could fly, go to the jet training program if you wanted to. And a friend of mine who had gotten jets because he was in fighters originally, told me that, he said, Gene, he says, it's a lot more fun flying the props. And he says, flying a jet is like flying a pinball machine. And so I just decided not to go on. I just stuck with the props, didn't ever got any jet training.
How interesting. Well, I'm going to cut this one right now and talk about your experience and things like that. If you were to offer some advice to a potential recruit, what would you tell them?
Well, I had never thought about it. Well, I don't know. You've got to prepare no matter what. No, whatever you're going to do, do your best at it.
That's a good.
And when, especially like in flight training and so forth, it's not a grade that you're looking for. You're saving your life.
That's a good point.
So what you learn or fail to learn could be fatal. And I've had my close calls.
But bottom line is keep trying.
Oh yeah, I'd say so. The Navy, I think, washed out a lot of good guys that probably many of them made them much better pilots than I was. Like for example, there was one kid that it was reported to me that he had gone through the Navy flight training program with the highest score of anybody at that time. And when we got to carrier qual, this was in the AT-6, or SNJ as the Navy calls them, the LSO washed him out of the program. And I do not know why. I mean, he was, and
For all practical appearances, he was succeeding, right?
yeah, he had a better score than I did or anybody else did that was going through the training program. He was like top dog. Now, the Navy did not like anybody to have any prior training. They wanted to train you all the way from the first time you were ever in an airplane to getting your wings. They wanted to do all the training. They didn't want you to know how to fly prior to coming in there. And one of the guys that I helped build a midget racer in the lab, or in the what do you call it, hobby shop, that the Navy had hobby shops that you could work in and do different things. He was building a midget racer, and he had already been a pilot flying midget racers in Florida.
Oh my goodness.
And he was a very good pilot, and he made it through the program.
He could fly an airplane.
He could fly an airplane.
But he couldn't do it the Navy way. Perhaps that's it.
No, he did fine with the Navy program.
Yeah.
And but the Navy did not like that, the fact that he knew how to fly, but they kept him in, and he did fine. So, but yeah, it's kind of strange.
Sounds like you're telling me that no matter what, keep trying.
Well, yeah, I guess.
Okay, I'm going to cut this one. We've been talking for about 25 minutes or so, and I appreciate your efforts.
Sure.
I appreciate your tolerating me as an interviewer, and I hope